At least 7,000 people have been killed and over 1 million others have been displaced in Sudan. This is fighting between the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces is continuing for a 7th month. The United Nations says it's only managed to raise a quarter of the funds it needs in order to address the growing humanitarian crisis in Sudan. For more on this, let's speak to the University of Pretoria's extraordinary Professor Abdi Samatar. A very good evening to you, Professor. Good to have your time tonight. Why is it taking such a long time to bring an end to the fighting between the army and the RSF in Sudan?
Two reasons why it's taken so long. I mean, these two individuals, the commander of the army forces and then the militias, there is no social or a political civic agenda that they are fighting over. It's a survival as who's going to be the top dog and ultimately loot the resources of the people of the Sudan. That's what the struggle is in the first place. And so both of them are incredibly tenacious, are unwilling to give any inch, no matter how many people could be saved by that compromise. And therefore what you have literally in Khartoum and in the rest of the Sudan more generally is the kind of a war you had in Mogadishu in Somalia in the 1991-92, which destroyed that country. Two warlords fighting over the crumbs and who are willing to take everybody with them if they don't win. So that's the context. The reason why it's taken so much time to mobilize the resources that the people of the Sudan need, and particularly the capital Khartoum, is because the African Union, who should be taking charge of this and leading it and advocating for it, have been sleeping on the switch by and large. And therefore it's other people, the Americans, the Europeans, the Arab League, and so on and so forth, who are jumping into the ship. Thirdly, the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza between the Palestinians and the Israelis, all of these have sort of diffused the attention that should have been focused here. The Palestinian question and the oppression in Gaza absolutely is horrific and horrendous, but the Sudan has been in the same loop for quite some time now. And so we can, as Africans, we should be able to walk and talk at the same time, do two things at the same time. But as a member of the Pan-African Parliament, I'm just distraught and disappointed by the absence of any initiative that's serious from the African Union.
So if both the RSF and the army in Sudan are driven by self-interest, as you were saying earlier, what does that mean then for a future Sudan and the future of Sudanese people under either leadership, regardless of who will emerge victorious whenever this does end, if we do indeed see an outright victor?
Well, I assume one of these two individuals will win, but what we need to understand as Africans and other human beings who care about the value of human life anywhere is that the people of the Sudan, and certainly the people of Khartoum, have a very deep civic roots. And that's why they were able, through demonstrations and strikes in the city itself, challenge Mr. Umar al-Bashir, the former general who have commanded Sudan for almost 20 years plus. And so there is a civic fabric in the country. My worry is that if many of these people flee and run away, then what will be left in the Sudan are people who are very ordinary, who are struggling with their own personal lives. And that will be the way for Sudan to become like Somalia in many ways. But there is a significant civic fabric that's democratic in orientation, that's Pan-Africanist and Pan-Arab, if you like, as Sudan is part of the Arab League as well. That can put Humpty Dumpty back together if they get the kind of a nudge from the international community or the African Union. But if that doesn't happen, then they will most likely flee the country for most part, and then the Sudan will fester for many decades to come like Somalia has been.
You raise a key issue, the fact that this is not Sudan's first taste, if you will, of political turmoil, because up to and after 2019, when ultimately Omar al-Bashir had to give way, the people of Sudan had been leading a civil disobedience campaign, if you will, protest, but at the last minute, the army then swooped in, and some said at the time that the army had stolen their victory. I wonder how much the foundations of the events of 2019 ultimately contributed to what is currently unfolding.
No, I think what the civic movement in the Sudan, from school teachers to doctors to ordinary workers to shopkeepers to academics and the whole lot have done is to sort of, if you like, defang the brutal regime of Umar al-Bashir, which now looks inane compared to what has happened since he left, unfortunately. And so I think much of that civic fabric is still there. I don't think the movement itself has made any sort of a contribution to the crisis that has taken place. It's the military who went into an agreement with the civic movement, agreed to create a civic prime minister, although appointed, not elected by the people of the Sudan. Yeah, I don't think that prime minister was strong enough to be able to do the kind of a political legwork, locally and internationally, to be able to create a counter force, not a military force, but a counter civic force that can confront these brutal mercenaries, if you like. So I think the hope of the Sudan is if the African Union can use whatever little sort of a moral force that it has, if they can join hands with the Arab League and then go to the United Nations, maybe that will create an opening for the civic movement to put Humpty Dumpty back together in the Sudan and create a civic-led government in that country.
And Professor Samatar, could there be, I wonder, peaceful coexistence within Sudan if, as we're seeing now, the country in some parts is split between the two, the army in control elsewhere, and the RSF, for example, taking large parts of Khartoum and other areas? Is that a political option at this point for Sudan?
No, I don't think so. I think these two individuals and their militias have to go. They have ruined the country. They have brutalized the people. We're talking about tens of thousands of people who have already lost their lives, and then the refugees all over the corner of that part of our continent. It's either one of them will win, but the compromise between the two, I don't think that's going to work because they don't trust. You know, what holds politics together ultimately in a sort of a democratic society is trust between communities and trust between people, that there is a bottom below which nobody is willing to go. Here they are willing to go into the grave, if you like, politically speaking. And so that's why the only hope for the Sudan is either one of them winning and then ultimately being themselves deposed by the civic movement, or the international community trying to sort of squeeze them on all corners such that there will be an opening for the civic movement. But I cannot imagine and see how these two forces can sort of go into a compromise that will save the Sudan.
I want to talk about the issue of the international community because you've referenced that quite a bit in our conversation tonight. I wonder how international the concern is around the situation in Sudan, because yes, we know there have been the ongoing negotiations, yes, not face-to-face in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, and the African Union efforts, which, as you were saying, have been underwhelming to say the least. Does the rest of the world care?
I think I am currently talking to you from Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the United States. The American focus now is Palestine, Israel, or whatever attention they are giving to that sort of lip services. The Europeans are still focused on their war in in Ukraine, if you like. And so people like the People's Republic of China, the government of India, the government of South Africa, the government of Brazil, these are the folks who should take the lead in the international community, that should put the map and the issues of the Sudan on the table for the United Nations and for any international forums. Without those sort of India, China, Brazil, and others, I don't think the Western world has any particular attention at this point in time.
Good to speak to you, University of Pretoria's extraordinary Professor Abdi Samatar. Good to speak to you, sir. Thank you for your time.